My name is Michael Birenbaum Quintero. I am a associate professor of music in the Department of Musicology and Ethnomusicology at Boston University. I'm the chair of that department, and I am associated faculty in African American Studies, Latin American Studies, and New England and American Studies here at Boston University. This is the teach-in and the kind of micro-strike associated with the National ScholarStrike for racial justice. There has been, as you all know, a lot of upheaval in the country around racial justice, particularly after the killing of George Floyd, and ongoing known and unknown examples of racialized violence. In solidarity with the strike that was carried out by the Wildcat strike carried out by the WNBA and the NBA, some academics have called for a scholar strike to withhold our labor and rechannel our labor into a teach-in around racial justice. So my job and my sort of niche as a worker is as a scholar of music. And so what I want to present today is a short discussion about an example in which we can look at music through a lens of racial justice, and look at an example of white supremacist racial brutality through a lens of music. And this is part of a larger sort of micro strike by other members of the Department of Musicology and Ethnomusicology here at Boston University, who are going to be asking some of these same questions. So my research is in Colombia, in South America. Colombia is one of the countries with the largest Black population in Latin America. Depending on how people identify themselves, Colombia may have the largest, in terms of numbers, the largest Black population of the Spanish-speaking world. Less than a month ago, on August 11th of this last year, these five boys Juan Manuel Montaño, 15, Jair Andrés Cortés, 14, Jean Paul Perlaza, 15, Leider Cárdenas, 15, and Álvaro José Caicedo, 14, 8th and 9th graders from the Llano Verde neighborhood in the city of Cali, Colombia, left their neighborhood to go to the neighboring sugarcane fields to swim in the pond and eat some sugarcane. When they didn't return home that evening, their families discovered that they had been killed. They were tortured and killed, shot. One of them had his throat slit in a happening that was really profoundly traumatic for the neighborhood of Llano Verde in the city of Cali. In part because Llano Verde is a neighborhood which is settled primarily by Black Colombians who themselves are the victims of forced displacement. That is to say, they were violently kicked off their land in the Pacific coast of Colombia. So this latest massacre of these five young boys is kind of just the latest step in a long and multi-generational process of racialized violence against Black Colombians. It's worth noting that this August 11th massacre happened in the context of a great deal of other violence, much of it against other young Black poor Colombians. So for example, on August 8th, in the rural town of Leyva, Nariño, Cristian Caicedo, a 12-year-old, and Michael Ibarra, a 17-year-old, both Black boys, walked from their town to the next town over where the school was located in order to return some homework that they owed their teacher. They were intercepted along the way by armed actors and were killed there. There was a massacre on later that month, in Tumaco, which assassinated 6 young Black men on August 16th. 6 young people, not Black, but 6 rural young people were massacred in Samaniego, also in the southwest of Colombia. So the question is, you know, these sort of violent dynamics have continued even in Llano Verde itself after it attracted all of this media attention. The very next day after the massacre of these 5 boys, there was an attack on the police station in Llano Verde, which killed one of the neighbors and wounded 15 people with a grenade. So these are really like heavy armaments that are being used against the civilian population. And again, primarily the poor and racialized groups like Afro-Colombians and indigenous people, especially in rural areas or in areas on the outskirts of major cities, such as Llano Verde. So, and one of the mothers of one of the boys, as recently as September 5th, a couple days ago, was threatened for pushing the investigation into the death of her son. Now, why is this happening? Well, at very best, in the best possible situation, this is an example of state abandonment. The Colombian state has multiple sorts of resources in place for taking care of the needs of its Black population in particular. There are land rights. This is unthinkable in the United States, but in Colombia, Black communities have land rights, somewhat along the lines of you know, Indian reservations here in the United States, but nonetheless, these populations are not protected by the Colombian state. In the peace agreement between the FARC guerrillas and the Colombian state, there is a series of measures built into the agreement around ethnic, quote unquote, ethnic communities, that is to say Afro-Colombians and indigenous people, which are not being enforced by the state. So there's a real active process by which the state is refusing to uphold its own laws for the protection of these sorts of populations. Now, what we have in Colombia today is a very, very complicated sort of landscape in which the former armed groups like the FARC guerrillas, ongoing guerrilla groups which never negotiated with the state, drug traffickers, sort of neighborhood street gangs, multinational corporations seeking to clear out territory for different types of agro-industrial concerns, and sort of neighborhood, quote unquote, social cleansing groups by which armed men assassinate people who they understand as being a criminal element, again, often young and Black boys. All of these different sort of entangled groups are armed and that war with each other over territory and over labor. When I say labor, I mean that in many cases, the assassinations of some of these young people is in order to intimidate the people of a given neighborhood or a given village to join a particular armed group and work for that armed group. In the best of circumstances, as I said, the state has utterly abandoned the Black population to this violent panorama. In the worst of possible interpretations, the state itself may be participating to some degree. According to Senator Alexander Lopez, the elements of the state itself, including the national police, the local police, and the armed forces, are participating along with some of these groups, which are very much integrated vertically, such that the street gangs are not just street gangs. They also might be associated with sort of larger insurgent groups or drug trafficking groups, or have particular types of treaties that are going on in these constantly evolving, super complex and very bloody battles over territory and labor in Colombia. Now, I want to turn specifically towards music and how we can understand what Black cultural production means in Colombia under these sorts of circumstances. So the first thing that I think is really important to recognize is that there is a really vibrant, really rich set of traditional practices from the rural areas of Afro-Colombian settlement in Colombia. So I want to give you a couple examples from this rural context. First is a type of music called curulao. Curulao. And this is a group called Perlas del Pacífico from Tumaco, Colombia. Another example, you know, the type of music that's used in this type of music is sort of similar to one that's used in religious gatherings, social gatherings. This is a type of music that is sung at funerals called alabao. This is a group from, this is not a group, this is a funeral in El Valle in Chocó province. Now, this music also can be found in the cities, primarily in settings that are built around sort of cultural festivals, which in some ways kind of make a sort of museum version, a kind of diorama version of traditional culture, especially for the purpose of economic development and tourism. So for example, in the city of Cali, the same city of Cali in which the Llano Verde neighborhood is located, there's an annual festival called the Petronio Alvarez Festival of the Music of the Pacific that is very much geared around this sort of tourism and economic development model. So let me show you a little clip of the Petronio Festival. So what this suggests is the possibility that the way in which this music continues in an urban context is really in a sort of economic kind of logic, which frankly doesn't necessarily do that much benefit for the people who themselves are the bearers of this culture, who have come to the city displaced by violence to places like Llano Verde. In fact, it might be difficult for people in Llano Verde to even arrive because, you know, transportation is so bad, you know, to the Petronio Festival when that happens. People in Llano Verde are excluded from the employment market. They're very much on the outskirts of the city in every sense. But nonetheless, what I think is worth emphasizing is that in many ways, people in the cities, in places like Llano Verde and in the western part of the city of Cali, which is a largely Black migrant population, people have reclaimed the music of that perhaps in the country they themselves didn't participate in. Perhaps they were a little bit embarrassed by these sorts of country practices, and yet people have found in this music ways of making community, ways of continuing different sorts of values that come from the rural context. For example, this is a type of music which is very much headed by women and which gives a kind of authority to women in ways that in the city, Black women are even more marginalized within, for example, the labor market. And yet, by recreating these musical forms, Black residents of Cali are able to re-articulate urban society in these sort of woman-headed sorts of ways. They're able to find in the sort of old ways of making music, community practices about healing. Because of course, as I said before, these are people who are still at the knife's edge of multi-generational forms of trauma and violence. And in many ways, these are ways for these populations to find, not by making music necessarily for profit, not by necessarily making music that's going to circulate on a, you know, on a CD or something like that, but by getting together to make music in the old ways, a way to instill values in their children, and a way to find a very, very rare commodity in urban Colombia today, which is a kind of Black self-love. I want to play one more example. This is from Llano Verde, and this is a group from the western part of the city of Cali called Casa Cultural Chontaduro, which is an organization of young people and of women who have remade traditional culture in this way that I'm talking about. And here is their observance of the death of these boys 3 days after the massacre on August 11th. So we'll watch this whole thing through. It's like 2 minutes long, and then I'll be out.
La vida entera, la vida que nos violentan y arrebatan desde siempre sin piedad, a nuestros ancestros, a nuestros cuerpos negros. Nos duelen nuestros niños, nuestras mujeres, nuestros líderes, nuestra gente, nuestros muertos, porque solo a nosotros nos duelen en el alma. Así esta Cali racista y clasista también nos quiera quitar el derecho a soñar una vida digna.
So I just want to end by saying we often think about the political potential of music as being bringing across a message for the state of sort of delivering a message of what's happening in the community. In this case, as I've said, the context of the state is one of abandonment at best. And in this case, what music does is a way of constructing a set of values, a set of principles, and a way of being together as a community that can help at least to build a sort of tolerance or sort of resilience for the ongoing context of brutality, which continues to characterize daily life for Black Colombians in places like Cali. A secondary sort of message I want to leave you with is that there are ongoing examples of racialized violence against Black populations outside of the United States. Colombia is definitely one of those places. If you are interested in following and educating yourself about the situation of Black Colombians, there are some good resources in English from the Washington Office of Latin America, WOLA. So you might be interested to find that. Thank you for attending this very brief micro strike and channeling of my labor towards bringing the situation of Black Colombians to your attention. And I hope you are able to see some of the rest of the teaching by other members of this department. And finally, I just want to express my own and my department's solidarity with the National ScholarStrike for Racial Justice.